Hi, I'm Hailey Hough for the Power of the Patient Project. My guest today is Bob Kieserman. Bob Kieserman is the Executive Director of the Power of the Patient Project, the National Library of Patient Rights and Advocacy, as well as the Project Director of MedFocus Research, its research division. Bob is the retired program director of the Healthcare Administration Program of the Arcadia University School of Global Business. He is also a medical librarian and a medical sociologist, and this summer, Bob headed a special virtual 10-week program for the graduate students from across the country who joined him in a research project to explore the perceptions of patients of how they feel about the patient experience. The report to the providers, the summary of that research, was released in the beginning of September, and Bob is here today to talk about some of the findings. Welcome, Bob.
Hello, how are you? Thank you.
Doing good, doing good. So first, can you tell us about the MedFocus research? How does it fit into the overall mission of the Power of the Patient project?
Okay, we started MedFocus Research in January, this past January. We felt that as part of our organization, we needed to do some research, a myriad of things. And the first thing we chose to tackle, excuse me, is patient experience. And so MedFocus Research is basically there to provide an opportunity for graduate students and other medical sociologists to come together to do some research that can be shared with physicians and patients.
Awesome, very awesome. So, can you tell us about the summer research project and the process your team used to reach out to patients and to providers?
Sure. I'll tell you this step by step. We surveyed the literature. That was the first thing. We wanted to make sure that we understood what others were saying about the patient experience so that we would have an overview of what is important to people who do research on this. We then spent about 3 weeks just doing questions. And we were doing all this virtually. So I had a team of 15 graduate students from all over the country. Very exciting for me because I really had never done that before. And we worked collaboratively using an online platform, and we came up with a multitude of questions, and we criticized the questions, and we finally came down to about 40 questions. We then decided that we were going to have 4 surveys. One was going to be for primary care, one was going to be for women's health, and one was going to be for mental health, and the 4th questionnaire would be for physicians. So each one obviously has its own patient population. We then very carefully decided how to distribute these anonymous surveys using SurveyMonkey among the United States. And we chose to use the major social media platforms. And we promoted it, and we posted, and we posted, and we did everything we possibly could to elicit responses. I'm very, very pleased to say that we elicited a significant amount of responses using that platform. Once we had the feedback, which was about 2 weeks, we put that out. We then came back and analyzed the data, carefully looking at what kind of trends there were. We used something called the social determinants of healthcare, which is a sociological concept where we look at why people get sick through sociology. In essence, how does age affect sickness? How does gender affect sickness? How does your work affect your sickness?
Right.
And using that criteria, we then analyzed this data and decided what trends we were seeing. Finally, when we were satisfied that we had really delved into what we got back, we spent about 3 weeks very meticulously putting together a final report. And as you had mentioned in the introduction, that final report was shared to all of the medical societies in the United States. The point we are at now is that we now need to go back to the medical societies and see what kind of feedback they got.
Mhm.
We also made it clear to people through social media that the report was available. And we've had several people, just plain old patients, who were curious to know what we found. And so they requested a copy. And that's basically the process that we went through. It took about 10 weeks.
Yeah. Wow. So I did want to ask, you did mention how there were 4 different kind of topics that you focused on regarding the surveys and focuses of your whole report. How did you determine these 4 subjects, such as like women's health, you mentioned was one?
Very, very good question. Obviously, almost every patient in the country uses primary care. Insurance companies basically have made it so that in many insurance programs, you have to go to your primary care physician first.
Right.
We then figured that there may be some really interesting things to look at in terms of women's health. One of the key things we were looking for, and I can tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit, is was there a difference when a woman had a male OBGYN as opposed to a female OBGYN? And then for mental health, we felt that there are so many people walking around, sadly, who don't have access to mental health. We wanted to find out how those who have been privileged enough to have a therapist, how they're seeing things. Is it working for them or not?
Mhm.
And finally, we wanted to sort of isolate the doctors and ask them their own questions. One of the things that we truly are focusing on and still focusing on, this probably is our next project actually, is what patients can do about burnout. Burnout is a big problem right now.
Right.
So that's why we chose those 4 people.
Excellent. And last question on this, did you find that any of the subjects of those 4 categories, were any of them more difficult to kind of gather information on as far as survey and research? Any sort of subgroup that was particularly more difficult to do research on significantly more than the others?
Good question. Mental health.
That's
Because of the stigma attached to mental health, there are many people, and we tried in our surveys, obviously, to make it very well known that all answers were anonymous.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, there was a hesitancy by people who were either seeing a therapist or could be seeing a therapist to participate in the survey. We had no problem with women's health and certainly no problem with primary care.
Wow. Well, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, this is kind of a popular time where mental health is being a little more brought to the surface. So it is kind of a bit more that's why I wanted to ask, because it did seem like that would be hard to gather a lot of information.
Sure.
So what was the most important feedback you got from both the patients and the providers, and what did it tell you and your team?
Okay, so we did verify for ourselves that doctors feel burned out. That's why we think we'll probably tackle that next. We also spent a lot of time looking at what kind of response we would get from patients about how long they have to wait in a waiting room and how long they have to wait in an examination room, which is very important to our project. We found that most people were satisfied, and that was good. I was thrilled to hear that people were satisfied, because I personally have sat in the doctor's office for 2 hours waiting for the doctor. We also wanted to make sure that that the patients were feeling comfortable with the amount of time that they're being seen by a doctor. That seemed to be checked out okay, which was a surprise to me personally, but most people were okay with it. We found that most patients do in fact trust their provider. And the last thing that we really found interesting was that one of the things that we have always had a pet peeve about in our project is that the front desk staff sometimes turns off the patient, and the doctor could be the best, but the front desk staff is rude. So we spent a lot of time putting extra questions into the surveys, all the surveys about the front desk and the perception of the patient, the front desk. And most people said it was okay, that they weren't affected by the front desk. The front desk was cooperative. You know, we realize that the front desk has a tremendous amount of power. They have power in terms of making appointments for us. They have power in terms of us getting our prescriptions. So they have a lot of power. And also they play a function called the gatekeeper function, where they can prevent us from talking to the doctor. So all those things are not so good. We wanted to measure them. And we're very happy to see that most respondents felt that they were happy with the front desk and the treatment they got from the front desk. So those are really the most important things that came out of the study. And then they were all very positive for the most part. In terms of anything that was a surprise, some of the women said that their doctors, not in women's health, but in primary care in particular, did not really pay attention to their questions. There's a problem in healthcare, and we knew this going into this, that a lot of men, OBGYN, don't take their women patients seriously. And we were concerned about that. And it turns out that we got confirmation that women are a little bit upset, and that I would answer this. The truth of the matter is that women are now preferring women gynecologists to men. And women would prefer to have women doctors across the board, which is wonderful because there are more women in medical school now than men. So that should work out well. So in essence, that's what we found, and then that's what we, there weren't a lot of surprises, but that's what we found.
Wow, excellent. Yeah, I do agree with, I have heard a lot about women being uncomfortable having male OBGYNs, simply because of that exact reason. They feel as if they're not taken more seriously and stuff. And do you think that's probably because maybe feel like men are unable to sympathize with the same health issues that women are having? Because
you're right on course. We found out that women, this is a well-known fact, women doctors are more caring than male doctors. Male doctors probably don't want to hear that, but the truth of the matter is that they're nurturing.
Right.
The woman by gender is just more nurturing, and that reflects itself in her being a doctor. And so personally, I'm going to a woman doctor now for primary care too, because of that very thing. At my age, as a retired individual, I want that care. I want that concern. I don't want to be dismissed about, the things that I bring to the table. If I'm coming to a doctor, I'm serious about coming to the doctor. So
right.
You're absolutely right. That's what we found, and that was substantiated.
Right. So, and then I also read throughout the report that when it comes to how patients felt about being rushed out of the office, that particular feeling, there was a little bit of a margin in between male and female as well, which I think are all pretty intertwined. So other than that kind of gender trend, did you see any other trends throughout your research with primary care, that whether it's gender again, or sexual orientation, or whatever race identify you go by, whatever, are there any other trends?
We don't think, from what we saw, it appears that their primary care is pretty open. I think they have to be.
Right.
Some of the women actually had issues with sexual preference in their doctors in women's health. And they felt discriminated against. But that was one of the things that we were measuring throughout the 4, discrimination. And we found that there was many young women felt discriminated against, either because of the sexual preference or just because they felt the older doctor wasn't paying attention to them because they were younger. So those 2 issues did come up, especially in women's health, but in primary care, no. In mental health, not much. I mean, it looked like those who responded said that they got plenty of time with their therapist, that they were pleased with the therapy sessions, and so that was all positive.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then so finally, based on what was learned from the study, what are some of the things that providers can do differently to create a better experience for patients when they visit a healthcare office?
Okay, so here's what we wanted to impart to the doctors. That was the whole purpose of the study. We want them to listen more. When a man or a woman goes through medical school, they are overwhelmed in terms of learning the science. And it's only been in recent years where the medical schools have actually tried to give them some kind of instruction on being a human being with a patient. One of the key things that you're taught in medical school is to listen. Because if you don't listen, you can't diagnose. Secondly, to be compassionate. Third, to be objective. Fourth, to engage face-to-face. One of the things that we examined was a lot of doctors are typing now because of electronic medical records. So a lot of some patients responded that they want to be able to see their doctor. And lastly, to treat the patient as a consumer. All those things, the things that really came out of the study, the patient said to us so that we could say to the doctors.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I think it's a really awesome thing that you're doing and a really awesome research focus that you're looking at. I think this is going to take quite an impact on the healthcare industry as you maintain your focus of just trying to improve the experience for patients, as well as trying to improve the type of service that the providers do give us. You're kind of working from both ends to make sure that it's a mutual understanding, which is really great. You're not just focusing on one or the other.
Right.
So thank you so much for talking with me today. It was wonderful speaking with you. I'm Hailey Hough for the Power of the Patient Project.